So the question on my mind right now is whether or not Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is going to let us have a canon postgame, meaning once we beat the final boss, watch the credits roll, is it going to cut back to the City of the Ancients and have the characters say, well, I guess we can tie up some loose ends now while we wait for Part 3 to come out? I don't actually think they're going to do that because of a couple of reasons involving one of the party members may or may not be completely MIA at that point based on what happened in the original. I think that's most likely going to be the case, in which case it would not let you use them while doing side quests, and that would kind of be a little bit of a letdown, even though that's how it worked in Remake. Spoilers for the original FF7 and Remake, by the way. So in Remake, Chapter 14, which you can see here, is where the bulk of the open world-ish side questing happened, which was kind of weird because Aerith wasn't in your party in Chapter 14. Little bit of a weird letdown that they're like, how about you rewind your mind all the way back to Chapter 14 and then do side quests there? It's a very gamey thing, and I don't love that. I much prefer it like in God of War 2018, where you beat the final boss, you have your little ending scenes, and then as you're walking down the mountain, the credits play, and then you just keep on playing organically. Characters in the world will make reference to the fact that you beat the game now. You know, it doesn't break the immersion. You just keep going. Your adventure doesn't end with the credits. I love that. It's a bit of a challenge to see how they could potentially do that with Rebirth, though. So in Rebirth, presumably Aerith is going to leave the party around the Temple of the Ancients. At least as far as I remember, that's when it happens. So if they want you to have a post-game where you have all of your party members together, it's possible that when you beat the game, it's going to tell you to chapter select all the way back there. And then once you pass Temple of the Ancients on your first playthrough, it's actually going to do a Final Fantasy 15 style thing where it's like the game is going to be linear from this point forwards. Be prepared. There's no coming back from here. I hope they don't do that. I think that's a little disappointing. Now, of course, the big issue here is that if they want to have a canonical post-credits game, they're going to have to come up with a few solutions to a few problems. For one, if you know who actually dies in this game, the game is basically going to end with our characters in the immediate aftermath of immense grief. And for them to then go, I'm going to go play some darts while I'm grieving for my friend, that's really weird. I don't think that'll jive super well. They would also, if they want to really go the extra mile, have a new version of the in-battle dialogue that everybody says, so they're not being like, hey, good job, we're having a grand old time here. It'll need to be like, glad we got through that one. We've been through enough already. Which they could totally do. I mean, in Remake, Cloud started out being like, I got this, and then he ended up being like, we got this. But even so, it's still a weird thing for them to get to that point in the story and then immediately be like, let's turn around, go back to the world map and do a bunch of side quests instead of immediately going after Sephiroth. What I do think they could do is have there be a bit of a time jump right at the end of the game where it's like, we've been grieving for days, we need to get back to, going after Sephiroth, but we could bulk up first. We could get stronger to make sure we really make him pay. Let's go back and do side quests until Part 3 comes out. That's my hope for what they do. It's a little bit of a stretch. I don't actually think they're going to go through with it. I do think they're going to have you rewind time and do side quests in a previous chapter, which is a little bit of a letdown, but I guess that just means we should, save the actual end for the game until after we've done a whole bunch of side quests so that it'll actually feel like the culmination of that rather than like an early ending thing and then going back and this weird sort of thing, which it will be for a lot of people. But if we know that going in, which right now we don't, we can kind of make that work in our favor to some degree. Now, the bigger question, if that ends up being the case, is what chapter will you rewind to? What point in the story will be the this is your endgame canonically section? And if it's like in the OG, it would kind of have to be, assuming Aerith dies, it'll kind of have to be either right before you go to the City of the Ancients, which means Aerith is not with you, just like in Remake, so maybe they'll go with that. Maybe that's fine, but a little disappointing. But I think more than likely, they'll encourage you to go back and do a sort of Temple of the Ancients timeline area where you have access to all of your party members. Or maybe they just do the end of the game and it's just like, but you have Aerith now, which is weird. I don't know. There's a lot of ways they could go with it. And then there's also the question of how do they keep track of side quests if you're chapter jumping a bunch? Is that going to be something separate from that? Is it just going to keep track of where you're up to in each side quest, no matter what chapter you happen to go to, if you have a completed game save. Very weird if they went in that direction, but they kind of have to solve that because it does have chapter select. But I know they also this time want to make your journey feel linear, you know, which I am definitely excited about. I think that was one of the most disappointing things about Remake, is that it kind of felt like anytime you wanted to do post-game stuff, you had to break canon, jump around between chapters, replay the beginnings of chapters, especially that Wall Market one, Jesus. Now, of course, there is still the possibility that in our main timeline, Aerith will survive. If that's the case, it solves all these problems, and they could very easily make a canonical post-game. But, as a lot of us are probably thinking from the recent trailers, it really seems like Aerith is still gonna die in the main timeline and then wake up in Zack's timeline where she's currently unconscious, because that's kind of the way that, from a PR standpoint, you can try to please everybody. You can please people who want new, you can please people who want old. There's always the possibility that like her being in this other timeline will lessen her death, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. As long as our main characters still have to grieve an actual death of her, I think that's okay. But what do y'all think? Do you think this game is going to have a canonical post-game? If not, where in the story are they going to jump us back to have our canonical endgame section? I think it's really up in the air. I hope it's canonical, so it feels important. I don't want to be jumping around chapter to chapter and replaying a bunch of intros just to do different side quests. But we'll see how it goes.